Hey everybody, so I wanted to talk a little bit about World of Warcraft rating because earlier today on my stream over on twitch.tv/Rurikhan, I was actually reacting to an Asmongold video where he goes over this specific article and gives a couple of points on his thoughts about World of Warcraft rating. And initially I was just going to post my reaction to that video, but I figured, you know what, maybe I can do something a little bit more short and to the point, which will hopefully be a little bit more consumable for people, and I can express my thoughts on the current state of World of Warcraft rating a little bit better. So let's get things started. So in the article here, you can clearly see that they say that WoW's telegraphs are so cluttered that even the best guild in the world is using darkening potions during raids so that they can fight more effectively. Now, in this article, there's also a link to a Twitch clip that I have right here. This is a clip of Limit Max. Limit Max is in one of the top guilds of World of Warcraft Mythic rating, all of that stuff, and you know, naturally they're some of the best players in the game currently whenever it comes to rating and all that type of stuff. So if we take a look at the footage here, we can actually see the effect that the darkening potion has on their attempt on this particular boss. So in order to set the stage here, this is a mythic boss. It's Sage Swift. I haven't really been following the race to world first or anything like that, but you guys can see what the scenery looks like. You can see that the ground texture looks a little bit in the gray side. Naturally, if you pay close attention and if you know anything about color, you'll know that these darker grays will actually have some hints of red in them when you're actually, you know, playing the game and all of that, which makes it so that certain boss abilities can mix in with the background. And on top of it, you know, bosses usually do swirly attacks, and as you can see, the ground itself has a bit of a swirly texture. When you mix those things together, sometimes it can be a little bit hard to figure out what exactly is happening in World of Warcraft raid, particularly whenever it involves mythic style mechanics, because these raids are very unpredictable and they're pushing the difficulty of the game to its maximum limit. So let's take a look at what the darkening potion is going to do here, because pretty much before they do this pull, Max is going to use this potion, and you guys can see the effect that it has on its screen. So pay close attention. Okay, as you can see, the screen is now much darker to the point where you could argue that the ground doesn't even have texture anymore. The only reason you can see the texture is because you have the Rogue's Shroud here. That is what this white thing is. For those of you that are not super familiar with World of Warcraft and you just clicked on this video out of curiosity, this area of effect basically makes it so that the whole mythic raid team here, they are hidden. So the boss doesn't actually know they're there. This is an ability called the Rogue Shroud, and it basically enshrouds your whole party in a mist of invisibility. Which, in my opinion, is also a mechanic that I'm not a huge fan of, but, you know, that's neither here nor there. It is what it is. In previous instances of, in previous expansions of World of Warcraft, this was actually kind of like a mandatory mechanic. I don't know if it still is or not for Mythic Plus, but for several Mythic runs, you would actually, you know, in order to get a good time, in order to do things decently well, it was expected that, you know, you're going to bring in a rogue, and the rogue's going to have this ability, and that is going to allow you to skip a bunch of mob packs and stuff like that. But anyways, that's just maybe a little bit too much detail. My apologies for that. So if you pay attention, the ground is black. What is the advantage that you get from this? Let's pay attention to some of the boss abilities. As you can see, they do the pull here, dealing all the damage. You can see the boss is casting a couple of abilities and whatnot. Eventually, the boss is going to start doing an AoE. And as you can tell, you know, due to the contrast of the ground now being black as opposed to it being gray and having its own swirlies drawn on it, this spell is now much more visible. Now, these swirlies, in my opinion, are already somewhat problematic because of the fact that they kind of like fade in the edges, which makes it kind of hard. Like if you're standing here, are you still in range of the swirly? Are you not? And, you know, this fading makes it so that the boundaries of the spell are not particularly obvious a lot of the times. And you guys might be wondering, why is this that important? Why can't they just move like over here? Clearly over here, there's not going to be a problem. And the reasoning behind that is if you are rating on this level on some classes, you want to move the least amount possible so that you can get back to your damage rotation, particularly if you're a caster, because casters sometimes have to stand still when they're casting some of their spells, and therefore moving from here to here or moving from here to like here can be the difference between 1 or 2 additional casts, depending on how efficient you are with your cast, depending on your stats, depending on a wide variety of factors, right? And, you know, those additional casts can be the difference between a clear and a wipe. That's why this is an important thing. But anyway, as you can see, once you consume the Potion of Darkness, ground becomes darker, and this just becomes a lot easier to see. Not just this, but also the following effects that we're going to be getting here. As you can see, there's a couple of red swirlies popping up from the big main swirly, and those are also going to have a much better visibility to them as well. So herein, you can see where the advantage of the Darkening Potion is, and you can see that, you know, why certain raid teams might choose to do this. Now, I'm not sure how frequently they use this. This might have just been like one clip. Like I said, I'm not really following the raid to world first because I'm not super interested in that type of gameplay. I have raided in World of Warcraft in the past. And, you know, I have been one of those players that installs like a zillion add-ons into my computer in order to be able to properly raid. Since then, I've also raided in Final Fantasy XIV. So as you can imagine, I have some opinions. Now I already know that a lot of people are going to be like, oh, it doesn't matter, but okay, so let's just get a comparison. Because, you know, I figured let's just pick a random boss from another guild. So I went to the Echo YouTube channel and I just picked a completely random boss. I did not, you know, cherry pick a specific thing. I was just like, okay, I'm going to click this boss. So this boss is Mythic Larodar, and it is Echo's, I believe this is their clear of this boss, if I'm not mistaken, because why else would you post something if it was not a clear? And curiously enough, my first example that I picked, I was like, oh, this is actually perfect to exemplify what I'm talking about, right? Because let's just put it like this. If you're someone who doesn't raid World of Warcraft, because let's consider that when it comes to race to world first and all of that, a part of the popularity of some games is also as spectator, you know, spectator spectacles, right? Like if you're looking at, say, whenever you're looking at video games content, say you're looking at a League of Legends, one of the things is you might not be aware of all the things that are going on, but you can kind of look at a match and you can get a glimpse as to whether or not a team is winning. You can get a glimpse as to whether or not they're doing well. So it is important for visibility to be good, not just for the players, but also for an audience. And when you look at this, right, does this look like it is a good visual experience for someone that is like a part of an audience trying to watch this? Like, personally, I don't think so, but feel free to disagree with me in the comment section down below. I'm not doing this video claiming that I am the Lord of all reason and everything that I say is right. I'm just trying to bring forth the discussion, and I'm actually looking forward to people's feedback on this, because I've talked about this in the past, but it's usually in the form of reactions, and this time it is a full-on dedicated video. So let's actually watch some of this in motion. And you guys can see that in the middle here, we have the boss. And you can see that there's like this puddle. I'm not sure if this is something that is damaging you. I'm assuming that it is, because at least it seems like it's some part of a mechanic that would damage you. And it's just very hard to actually see anything that is happening. In part also because of the UI. We'll get into that in a bit here as well. But now I'm just trying to focus on the actual stuff that is happening on screen, apart from the UI stuff that this player has going on. And even just trying to figure that out, it's like the legibility is just not there. The readability of the different abilities that the boss is doing, I just feel like it's not very well communicated, right? And this is one of the reasons why players will consume these potions, to try and get rid of as many art elements as they possibly can from the game in order to improve the visibility for boss mechanics and all of that stuff, right? Now, by contrast, let's take a look at another boss in another game, which is here. Now, in here, we have a mythic level fight, right? This is World of Warcraft mythic rating being the hardest PvE content in the game. So I figured that it is only fair to compare it with the hardest PvE content that is currently available in Final Fantasy XIV. So this particular fight right here is the Omega Protocol. Now it is important to mention that very much like I've never actually seen this particular boss fight before, I've also never seen this particular boss fight before. Now I know that some people will say, oh, you're lying, blah, 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 but I can assure you, I've never attempted doing ultimate raids. I have done savage raiding in the past, and I've played a significant amount of hours of Final Fantasy XIV, so I'm familiar with its UI. I'm familiar with some of its mechanics and all of that jazz, just like I've raided in World of Warcraft in the past, and I am familiar with that game's mechanics as well. But I'm not familiar with this particular fight, never attempted it, and never even seen it. So, I just clicked randomly in the middle of the Omega Protocol, and let's take a look at the mechanics that are happening here. So if you pay attention, even though there's still a lot of things happening, my eye kind of like filters some of these markers with the same way that you would filter markers in World of Warcraft, right? Because when you see this 2 here, and the D and the C and the B, this is essentially the same thing that you have over here in Limit Max's videos, where you have the X and the square. It's the same thing. It's static markers that players place on the ground to serve as a reference point for other players, right? That's essentially what those pillars of light are, just in case you guys are curious. And then if we continue, you can tell that, like, okay, so there's definitely a mechanic here where there's 2 players with a tether. There's another 2 set of players with a tether. The bitrate is not the best for this video, but, we'll make do. It is still readable, the stuff that is happening on screen. At least in my opinion, it is. Now, you can call me biased, or maybe it's just my eyes have been better trained, but like, for instance, you look at this mechanic and you can clearly see there's 2 towers here. You'll notice that one of the players instantly positions himself inside the tower. That means that these are soaking towers, which means the players need to move into position in order to soak the tower that is coming down. And most likely, if these players are not positioned inside the towers are going to deal too much damage, most likely even wiping the raid. Now, some of you might look at the top and you might see some letters here. For some strange reason in this video, they are memeing on the song that is playing. So these letters are not like an add-on or anything like that. This is just someone that edited this video. They put meme lyrics for the music that is playing in the background. Now, as you can see, another mechanic that I would identify here would be like you have 2 more towers here. These are going to be soaked by different players. I'm assuming that these players probably have some kind of like a mechanical debuff. You can see those here. Like, these right here, the red thing that you have here and these 2 red things, these are all mechanic symbols, I would imagine. Well, maybe not all of them. I'm not sure. I think that these are mechanic symbols because they're debuffs, and usually these types of debuffs are going to be raid debuffs. This one, these arrows here are also going to be mechanics. This is something that players can hover over when they're progressing, and it will actually tell them what the mechanic is doing. So these players already know what the mechanics are, but you can even identify the mechanics that are happening here. And by the way, this is all stock UI. None of this UI has been altered with add-ons, at least nothing that I can personally identify. But as you can see, you can kind of like read the mechanics that are happening here, whether as a player or as a spectator, without the use of any add-ons whatsoever, and without, just without even knowing what the hell is going on in this fight. Okay, you can read the mechanics that are happening. You can see the boss. You can see what is happening. By contrast, if we once again swap over to here, all I see is kind of like a big red mess and a bunch of stuff in the UI, right? So what is the point that I'm trying to make here? The point that I'm trying to make is that these raid encounters don't appear to have been properly tested. Now, this next part of the video is going to be a little bit of educated speculation on my part, because in the past we have seen several posts that would indicate that Blizzard could potentially not be able to field an internal raid test team. And a lot of times they allow some of the top world guilds to actually come in and test some of their raid encounters on the mythic difficulty on beta servers and alpha servers and stuff like that. And, if you're a top guild that is going to be racing for world first clears and you get to experience a boss ahead of time, Like, sure, you might be testing the boss and you might give some feedback to Blizzard like, hey, this spell hits too hard, this spell does not hit hard enough. But naturally, you're not really, at least I would imagine, you're not really going to be focusing on the more artistic aspects of the fight. You're not really going to be focusing on whether or not the color scheme makes a whole lot of sense, about the readability of the mechanics themselves. As a matter of fact, if you're a top-end guild that is going to be running Race to World first and you happen to be testing a boss fight ahead of time, one of your main focuses, I would argue, would be to try and figure out what the strategy is going to be. Now, actually thinking back to it, I don't know if they actually get to play these bosses on mythic difficulty or if it's like a lower difficulty or something like that, but I have known that in the past some of these guilds do experience these bosses ahead of time. But if you're a top end guild, your main priority, considering that your sponsorships and the overall success of your guild is going to be based around whether or not you win the Race to World first and how entertaining you can have your VODs be on that Race to World first, right? So your priority is most likely going to be, let me see if I can figure out some kind of a strategy here while we're testing out this boss, something that we can apply when these bosses get deployed into live servers. So, that is not necessarily the mentality that you would want someone that is testing this boss fight for readability or ease of use or anything like that. As a matter of fact, it's not even in their best interest that these bosses are easy, because the harder these bosses are, the better position they are going to be in terms of Race to World first. Now, I want to make one thing perfectly clear, because I understand when I say these types of things, it might sound like I'm throwing shade at these guilds. No, not by any means. This is just like, listen, if I was in their position, it would be the exact same thing that I would be doing. This is not something that I would consider to be evil. This is just like, look, we're trying to help out, but we're also trying to help ourselves out. It's just that simple. That's the way that I would look at it. So I would argue that that is potentially not the best environment for really figuring out what a mythic boss should be like. You need to have people that are clearing this stuff internally. Now, whether or not Blizzard has them, or if Blizzard is giving their internal raid team, maybe tweaked stats for them to test specific mechanics, which would make sense, right? You would have a team and, let's make the boss go straight into mechanic 2 instead of clearing the whole thing in one go. I believe in the past there were even mythic encounters that Blizzard specifically said, our internal team wasn't even able to beat this, which to me doesn't really make sense, because if your internal team isn't able to beat it and all of the mechanics that go into it, it's just a weird situation that we find ourselves in. So we need more a look at this that is not just about the artistry of the encounter itself, but also about the gameplay of the encounter itself. And I would argue that the gameplay of the encounter is more important than the level of artistry of the encounter. Players need to be able to clear this. And when I say players, I'm not talking about top-end guilds, because if you think about top-end guilds, that is going to be a very low percentage of people that are actually going to be able to complete these encounters. Like, for instance, in my current experience with World of Warcraft, I wouldn't be able to even perform on any of these encounters. I'm well aware of this. But the fact of the matter is, we don't really see a lot of this critical analysis as the Race to World first is going on from the top of these top-end guilds, because they're just trying to finish the raid. They're trying to be the first ones to do it. I'll be very curious to hear from them once this whole thing is over. But then there's another thing that I would like to bring up, because one of the reasons as to why these encounters need to be as complex as they are is specifically because if you look at this UI, right? You look at this UI that we have right here, and I don't know how many people watching this video will end up being big WoW buffs, but if you look at what you have on the screen here, I'm going to tell you guys, just by looking at it from my World of Warcraft experience, what I identify as being part of the stock UI, stuff that you can get out of the box without installing add-ons, okay? And there are two elements that I can identify here that are part of the base UI. Those elements are this buff bar, which I'm not even sure if it's part of the base UI, because the way in which it is scaled and the way in which the buffs are being shown, it might actually not be part of the base UI, but it is very close to what the base UI is, so I would be okay with considering this part here part of the base UI. The other thing would be the minimap. This minimap also looks like the minimap that we got in Dragonflight. So I would assume that this is also part of the base UI. Everything else in this UI has been changed. So like these frames, this is not part of the base UI. This right here is not part of the base UI. This is not part, none of this is part of the base UI. And essentially add-ons have become a necessity. And as you can see, you know, top-end guilds are using heavily modified UIs because the base UI of the game is just not really viable for rating at this level. As a matter of fact, if we go in and we look at another player, and it's pretty much the same situation here, not even the map is the base one. They've changed the map as well. And everything else in here is also modified with the exception of, once again, the buff bar up there seems to be the stock UI. If we go, because there's multiple POVs in here. If we go in here, once again, we have the same situation, completely different UI. And this is going to be something that is very common for anyone that is rating high-end or even people that are just rating on the heroic level because the base level UI simply can't keep up with the with the mechanics that they're implementing. And that is actually one of the reasons why a lot of these mechanics are so complex. It is because, there are all of these add-ons that are doing all of these crazy things, and Blizzard has to kind of like make things challenging in spite of the existence of these add-ons. Now, they say that they're not doing that, but I mean, come on. Let's take an actual look at these mechanics and everything that is happening. Of course, they have to take into account the existence of add-ons. Now, let me tell you guys, one of the things that really annoys me when it comes to add-ons is deadly boss mods. And why is that? Because it essentially kind of gives you the solution to the puzzle of a boss. Well, not exactly the solution, but it gives you everything that the boss is doing, which allows Blizzard to have very lazy implementations when it comes to their mythic encounters, because it's like, you don't really need to properly communicate your boss abilities when there's an add-on that does this. So this right here is, at least I believe that this is part of Deadly Boss Mods. If it's not Deadly Boss Mods, something like Big Wigs, or it might even be a custom weak aura, because that's another thing that happens with a lot of these top-end guilds. They straight up have people that are coding add-ons for them on the fly as they're doing Race to World first. So like Limit Max might identify a mechanic and he might go like, hey, I need you to get me a weak aura that notifies players when they have this mechanic and give them this message, so that gives them a little help of how to solve the mechanic. Which to me is just like, I just don't think that's a reasonable way to play the game, and it's not a reasonable expectation, right? So anyways, what this particular bar here does is, as you can see, it tells you everything that the boss is going to do. So in 1 minute and 17 seconds, the boss's ability pools comes off of cooldown. So at that point, he can cast the ability pools. In 1 minute and 7 seconds, the boss is most likely going to summon adds. Not exactly 1 minute and 7 seconds, but that's when his ability comes off of cooldown, and at that point, the boss can summon adds. In 49 seconds, the boss is going to go into this Raging Inferno phase, whatever that is. In 27 seconds, Orbs. In 8 seconds, Charge. And 4 point... You guys get the idea, right? You basically have like a map of everything that the boss is going to do here. And therefore, Blizzard has to do unpredictable things to compensate for the fact that add-ons are giving players all of this information. So how do you solve this? And to me, the answer is quite simple. Remove the add-ons. And I understand, and whenever I talk about this, people get mad. They tell me that the add-ons are not the problem. But after everything that we just talked about, are you honestly going to tell me that add-ons are not the problem as to why a lot of bullshit is happening? Now, look, understand, I'm speaking about this as an outsider, and I'm curious to hear people's takes on it, but ultimately, I'm not that invested in it. Like, I am interested in World of Warcraft rating, but at the same time, as long as this is the state of World of Warcraft rating, I'm not really that interested in participating in it, because it's just not fun to me to, play a puzzle that's kind of like been solved and having to deal with all of these abilities. And if we actually consider that because theoretically speaking, Blizzard could shut off the API that gives all of this data to the add-ons, and then the add-ons wouldn't be able to do this unless you use like a third-party software, which, as far as I'm aware, is not really permissible by the terms of user, by the user terms, EULA, whatever, right? But if Blizzard was to remove a lot of these add-ons, number one, you would have a much cleaner experience. Like if we look here, you know, you could have something more akin to this, which is significantly cleaner. And by the way, like I said, this is all stock UI in here. And having an experience like this means that they can also communicate things a little bit better because the players don't have a list of abilities of everything that is happening. So they can afford to do proper telegraphing of abilities. Like, where was those towers thing? Let's see whatever the next mechanic is going to be. Like this, for instance. This is a clear mechanic. You can see that there's a direction. Depending on which direction the players are facing, the mechanic is going to solve in different ways. And obviously, this is going to be a thing where you have a front section and a back section. And I'm not exactly sure how it's going to solve. But it seems to me, considering that this player is aiming the front section towards here, and this player is aiming the front section... Let's see the way that he aims it. I believe he's going to turn around any second now. Yep, see how the player turns around and faces the mechanic outwards? Probably means there's going to be some type of an AoE or a laser beam or something once the mechanic resolves that would have killed and damaged other people. Well, apparently it's just a big ol' AoE, but for some reason all players had to face it outwards. Assuming that if you face it in a way that will face other players, that'll probably be damage. But basically the point is you can actually look at the mechanic itself and you can resolve the mechanic itself without having a bunch of text on screen that is telling you when something is going to happen, how many seconds until something happens, and so on and so forth. And personally, I find that to be a much more enjoyable experience, and I actually believe that Blizzard can make raids that are challenging while at the same time also being readable for newcomers. Because imagine if you're someone who is a newcomer to World of Warcraft and you want to dive into raiding and you're just like, oh man, I want to jump into raiding, I want to learn what it's all about. And then you look at this. And it's like your first task to learn how to raid is to figure out how to configure your UI and install all of these different things, from weak auras to deadly boss mods to proper raid, what are they called? Raid frames, all of this stuff, right? It's a bit of a turnoff. I think we could actually have simpler raids if we simply didn't have all of this add-on bullshit telling us every single thing that the boss is going to do. And those raids could still be challenging, but it would be a different type of challenge where you would actually have to look at the boss and see what the boss is doing, as opposed to looking at a bunch of boxes of text. But again, that's just one man's opinion. I am curious to hear from you guys. What do you guys think about this? Because at the end of the day, I could be completely wrong. Maybe a majority of the community actually likes this type of experience more. And, you know, it is what it is. I'm not here to, you know, crap on the way that people do raiding or not. This is just my thoughts on it. These are the things that I feel would be more interesting, particularly thinking in terms of the long-term health of the game, because it would be more approachable for new players to jump into the raiding scene. And at the same time, the raids can still be challenging mechanically without necessarily needing to have all of this on your screen. But let me know what you guys think about it. That's going to be it for now. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe. Peace out.